All right. So here we are. We are booting up the what is it, autumn season or some shit of the Wise Crowds design call. We've got fucking James showing up. James, where the fuck you from, man?
Uganda.
Uganda.
Yeah,
You were just giving me the game on the different groups that you've been working with and this cross-pollination thing. Can
oh
you
yes.
tell that?
So I am with I work with the Social Innovation Academy, where our vision is regenerative communities living in a responsible world, and so we support marginalized youth groups to transform their lives, to give them kind of like purpose and meaning, but through social entrepreneurship and among many things. So we had an event with two other organizations last week. One of them is called Relevant Ventures. They do more raising capital for businesses and entrepreneurs. And also the other organization is the Circular Design Hub. So we started a networking. We did some kind of like a networking event last week
Mhm.
just to see who will turn up, what will be the engagement. We had planned for 50 participants,
Mhm.
but 100 showed up.
That's a all right. The pleasant surprise. You don't see that very often. Huh?
I
Nice.
know. So the interest is there. We got feedback after. The interest is like really it's there for this engagement. So we're currently exploring the possibility of doing joint programs together. Relevant SINA and Circular Design Hub
Mhm.
coming together as separate entities to do programs or joint events together in ways that we cannot do individually.
Mhm.
Synergy. So yeah, I'm going to be facilitating a workshop. I'm calling it the community weaving workshop. So I'm weaving these three communities together, getting their brains, getting their minds, trying to harness the collective intelligence
Nice.
from the three different organizations to try
Okay.
to come up with new ways of engaging, of interacting, of working together.
Word.
So,
This is
so I'm thinking of using I'm thinking of using crowdsourcing as a liberating
Mhm.
structure to kind of like get ideas,
Mhm.
from people because we have a mix of different people, the co-founders of those three organizations.
Right.
We also have from SINA, we're expecting the entrepreneurs who are participating in our empowerment programs. So
Mhm.
kind of the program beneficiaries. I
Right.
know that's a wicked word these days, but I'm just using it for this case,
Yeah.
explain it. So those are the people. So we're expecting the entrepreneurs. We have the co-founders of these entities who are also coming together. Circular design, yes, I think yes, the circular design have also are going to be having some of their entrepreneur members who are also going to participate. Relevant Ventures is just new, like they are starting. So it's mainly the co-founding team.
Cool.
Um, it's diverse. It's a mix of age groups. So we have elders from 40 years, 50 to youth of 18, 20, 36 coming together. Uh, Mixed cultures, Europe, Africa, everywhere. It's kind of like the whole world, different
Mhm.
cultures coming
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And they are mainly, most of the participants are creatives, like guys who think wild, like artists, artistic thinkers, guys who want to do things outside the norm. do
Hmm.
things in unconventional ways. Crazy, crazy guys. You get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, those are the kind of guys that
Mhm.
bring. I think.
And I,
Yes.
when you talk about creatives, I get what jumps up for me is the like the diffusion of innovation, right? The whatever that you got your innovators and early adopters, and
Mhm.
people who tend to be in the more entrepreneurial phase tend to be pushing out towards the innovative space, right? They're creating new solutions that don't exist and they have no real certainty, but they want to find out, right?
Mm.
So when and then you sort of describe them as like crazy people, like, yeah, for compared to people like in the middle of that distribution, those guys are lunatics. Nobody
Yeah,
wants
true, true.
no, no. And so how long are you thinking about for this gathering? Right?
This gathering may last no more than 2 hours.
2 hours.
Mm.
Dang. Yeah, trying to get folks to, so you're really just sort of like kicking things off or like really seeding the possibility space. And like, what's the frequency that you think that you got that this group or these groups might be able to be orchestrated together? Is this going to be a one-off thing, or is there a possibility of doing a series?
No, this is a one-off because it's going to be from this meeting. We're going to be getting ideas for potential general joint programs,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
the three entities can do. So it's a brainstorming meeting, which is a one-off. So we
yeah,
want to make the most of it
yeah,
to be able to generate most of the
yeah,
the
for
best
sure.
ideas possible.
So you've got, it sounds like in terms of goals for such a session, I would imagine most importantly, you've got some important network weaving in terms of building the relationships between these people that are in different orgs and which may have, of course, will certainly have slightly different cultures and a different vibe and a sort of different area of focus,
Yeah.
creating some form of relationship, but also sort of shared language in there. And then I
Mhm.
think you've got the more practical aspect as well, being like, what is the shit that we could work on together? And there's 2 hours is clearly not a lot of time. Um, but there is a couple interesting moves that we have prototyped and played around with I don't know if you've met Unai, he sometimes is on this call. He's in
Yes,
yeah,
he's the one who connected with this
yeah.
call.
So in his group in the Shippo and in Refi and the Innovation Academy in Jombe in Tanzania, what we tried to do, we obviously had way more time. I think they were talking about a full 1 day event, half day on both sides. Um, but we had prototyped a string of structures that went from all this is going to be way too fast. We started off with basically, your standard impromptu networking, everybody just get prepared to interact. And then we jumped straight into anxiety circus, which rhymes with the 2510 crowdsourcing that you mentioned. I wasn't sure if you said that you were going to run either wise crowds or crowdsourcing. Um,
Crowdsourcing, crowdsourcing.
crowdsourcing, the one with the index cards, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, anxiety circus is just a variation on crowdsourcing. The difference is where the invitation or where you put the attention on. With anxiety circus, you would ask people to use the index cards to write down something that sort of they're worried about, right? So similar to like Triz or something along those lines, you'd first want to catalog we first catalog the sort of problem space that is well recognized between people. And then we do the same. Everybody takes an index card, writes down something that's sort of keeping them up at night. And then we do the same song and dance, 5 times 5 score on 1 to 5. And then we can then rank the concerns of the community in that same very obvious, like every card has been voted on 5 times by 5 random people. These are the 5 cards, that are the most concerning for everybody in the group. And you just sort of call that good. And that helps to sort of cohere the group around a particular driver. right? A particular problem space so that we're all trying to solve the same underlying concern, more or less. Um, what we did after that, they had some particular situations, but there was another combination of structures that I found was very good for this type of like collaborative network weaving. And that was a sort of combination in line with there's a sort of method or setup called strategic doing, um, by Rob Morrison, I believe. Um, their blueprint is kind of this, 10 steps to create a collaborative network. And the move itself had to do with the discovery action dialogue. So we would go from these fears, these concerns, and then we would basically ask people, all right, split up into small groups. And in these small groups, one person sort of guides the conversation, another person sort of takes notes. And that conversation basically is about positive deviance. What are the existing solutions that already are in the community for those problems? And so rather than asking people to like invent solutions or to like hypothesize stuff, we would just go, the first question is, how do you know that that problem or challenge is present? Like, what do you see that lets you know this thing is actually popping up? The second is, what do you do to solve that problem or challenge? Which is, because everybody's got solutions, everybody does some shit some of the times. There's things that work out there. Um, and to acknowledge those. And then the third question is when things get really interesting, which is, what prevents you from applying that solution all of the time, right? Because there are real constraints, whether it's time, whether it's resources, get those things on the table that prevent us from doing the simple and easy solutions all the time. And then the fourth question lands on, so who do I know in my environment that is actually particularly effective of solving this problem and doesn't seem to be blocked by the things that block me?
Wow.
What is like the exceptional and state of the art of solutioning for this problem? And then, of course, we basically go around the group. Everybody sort of shares their hero stories or people that are exceptionally effective. And then we basically just go, all right, any ideas? Now that we got all this really good stuff on the table, like what, how could you apply that? What's life? Since these guys don't necessarily share a context, that's probably good enough. There are two additional questions that normally slot in, which is, after you've got any ideas, who needs to be involved, and then who's volunteering to like quarterback this shit. And maybe that's interesting, right, for these, this network weaving environment. But that requires a little bit more containment than just those two questions if they don't automatically have a shared context. Like, you would want to have some form of enablement for them to slot back into these groups and then do progress and shit like that. But we were using this initial structure in relation to that problem that we identified with 2510 crowdsourcing, actually as a way to front load a conversation around alternative forms of capital. So, there's both Gregory Landua came up with a framework about 8 forms of capital, and there's a lot of these new different frameworks around that include social capital, spiritual capital, ecological capital, blah, blah, blah. And so we were using these stories that people gathered together in the discovery action dialogue to actually go, okay, what were the things that seemed really effective? And then we would sort of we would link them to, oh, well, this person it turns out is deploying social capital, even though they're resource poor in that aspect. They're using their relationships to overcome that obstacle. And so on the basis of these stories that we were collecting, we were sort of bridging that into this theoretical aspect, which is basically look with new eyes at the world around you and figure out how you can be more creative and resourceful with shit. And whether that's required in this group or not is a different question. I find that the lens around these are different types of resources that you can look for that you might be more abundant than actual financial capital.
That's interesting when that approach, it reminds me of, I don't know whether you've heard of the ABCD approach to community building, asset-based community building, which helps people to see the assets they have rather than the needs.
Precisely.
And so when you just raised that, it reminded me of that framework, which I need to go back and read through so that I could see which steps or which strategies from the ABCD approach I could integrate in this one also that I'm taking with the crowdsourcing. Yeah, that's a very interesting.
Well, and the reason that we're doing that is just to try and get all of the sort of wealth or the abundance. What do we have available on the table? And then we can again come back to that initial state of what's the question or concern that matters to us, and how can we use this pool of resources? Somebody is really losing their shit out here on the street. It's fucking
That's
drama in the hood in Amsterdam. At any rate, how can we think about, so there's a question that I think is very interesting and relevant, especially for what you're trying to do is if you
yeah.
wanted to create a cross organizational collaboration, what do the actual pods of people look like?
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
mix those people up on randomly? Do you ensure that there's sort of participation from each of the groups? Do you just sort of leave it up to chance? Do you choose geographies in order to weave networks across these groups? Um, because this question about resources is also very particular to my identity. Like, if let's say in the happiest example, we can build a shitload of trust, and I am happy to share my resources with you. That doesn't necessarily apply to your organization or your friend, so to speak, right? So as we're talking about this sort of mapping exercise of what are the resources available, I find that I want to do that embedded in the sort of clusters that make sense for that context, right? So that when we're sitting here talking about what are the resources available to us, it's not an abstract, our communities. It's a very small cluster of like 5 or 7 people that is like, what are the resources that we've got available? And how can we look at those things, look at those problems and go, what's a creative way that we might be able to deploy these resources that doesn't, and especially as you're starting out, that's fucking easy, right? It has to deliver like some tangible value within like maximum 3 months. And your ideal, the fantasy scenario is in like an approximate time commit that looks like 1 hour per month from these 5 to 7 people. So it on one hand will probably look like a pretty superficial thing. So as you're
Mm.
talking about your brief of like what's the thing that we can do that together that we can't do apart, the aspect of that I would foreground the most is just actually fucking collaborate outside of an established organizational structure. That's the one thing that you can definitely not do individually. Because the actual solutions that one of those subgroups might be able to deliver in fucking, in a relatively limited way that doesn't cost them a shitload of time, energy, and actual capital outflow is probably going to be pretty small. Like that, you might have, be able to arrange a fucking potluck or gather together an event or, throw up some fucking, clean up an area or maybe have an initial planting of an area. All of those things don't take a crazy amount of time and resources, and the impact of it individually is not, it's not like world changing, but simply establishing a subgroup across organizations that's able to deliver some tangible value is like the initial set of like, oh, well, then it makes sense for us to spend more time together because we get shit done. If
Mm.
if we have the biggest, coolest, most ambitious plan on the planet and we don't get shit done, then I'm going to find other reasons or other things that are more important or do have impact in my life to get done. But if I've right out of the gate, me and this subgroup of new individuals are able to put a win on the fucking table, right? Something that is like, oh yeah, this becomes, actual value to my community, or let's be really honest, elevates my status, adds to my portfolio of finished projects, fair enough. That's a good enough excuse for me to go, okay, well, we're getting shit done. I will keep showing up in this process, so to speak.
Mm. No, that's interesting. You just reminded me of another tool I used at some point, which I think I'm going to use for this workshop, especially on the resource mapping part. And the session is on building relational capital. And one of the activities I would do was get individuals. So the person has a flip chart, and so you draw a mind map with the central image of yourself, and then it has a circle with your image, and then out of the circle are branches, and the branches of different colors. So red means those are the people in your contact who are very good at helping you, maybe source for finances or something like that. Green could be the people help you, they connect you to knowledge resources like books, uh, whatever. Then green, I mean purple, they are good connectors. They connect you to organizations, to opportunity. So something like that. So each person has their map, and then we kind of like at a certain point draw a combined mind map, a meta map of all the people, showing the
Right,
different
right.
resources and connections. Then that could be what we could feed on, what we could use as input to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, amen. Like, I think no matter what, like this move, like whatever way that it manifests, this move of like ensuring that we have clear recognition that there's a lot of different types of resources that that may be readily abundant and cost us nothing to tap on and activate, uh, is sort of like the killer app. Right? That's the for lack of a better word, that's like the prison genius, right? I always think about like I've never been to jail, it's knock on wood, but I I knew people who did, and they always talked about like that there was always this like mad scientist person that like with just like with just three ingredients could cook up a meal, right? Packet of ramen, some Kool-Aid and just some random shit. And then, but there was food because of that. Right? And so what I really want is like that type of particular brand of creativity to be sort of stimulated for folks so that we can get that stuff on the table and then go, all right, is it possible for us to actually do something on that? What I really love about the opportunity about doing like especially an artifact, a physical artifact of like a mind map. um, my experience is that those are tricky to do in person. They just turn out to be a fucking mess, and they're hard. So again, the move of bring those into smaller groups is easier than trying to get 100 people on one mind map. And the second aspect around that, um, I don't quite remember. No, it's the opportunity that it's hard to activate, but to get people to do that shit in advance, right? To like, hey, so that we can show up and hit the ground running, please like take a look at this question and maybe even use this tool, offer them like a link to a Miro board or some shit like that, or give them a real clear explainer on like this is what we're talking about. Just have a list of these people, like these 5 people that help you out in these 5 different ways is already a game changer in terms of like, hey, that pre-work has been done. Now we can grab that information and sort of run with it, hopefully.
Yep. Yep. I think this is like super helpful. I've taken some notes. There's one other thing which has been on my mind. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I don't know whether it will be possible, but the idea is so there is I have a group of
What's
uh,
that?
artists,
Okay. Yeah.
artists, but we kind of like we want to just start doing like we're looking for a space to
Hmm.
just start drawing stuff, putting out things, painting, sketching. But the question has been, what are we actually drawing about?
What are you actually what?
Drawing or painting
Hmm.
about? What's the theme? And then just last week I was consulting with ChatGPT and I got an interesting idea. I asked, how could I use my journal, journal to like do creative, interesting stuff? So one of the ideas which came out was, what if in that workshop or that space, we were kind of like painting or drawing about our life experiences as told in the journal. So the themes that come out from the journal, we could kind of like visualize them, paint or draw or sketch about those things. And so that was something which I've been thinking about this week.
Hmm.
Like, how do I actually start? How would a session look like? Or we just come and just start doing it freestyle? I don't know, but some
Hmm.
kind of like
Sure. So
how, yeah, yes.
let me check if I got the basic setup. So it sounded like you said you have a journal or something along those lines.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So folks have done some reflective work and that thing sort of exists, and you
Mhm.
want to see about like creating a shared artifact out of that.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's real cool. I'm always a huge fan of artifacts, right? Any way that we can take this culture that we're building together and like create something that is able to like inspire and influence somebody else, and especially around narrative. The first thing that jumps out at me that I've had a lot of fun, like one of my favorite structures is drawing together. Like if you have a particularly creative group, this might feel to them like a huge constraint because drawing together, it really invites you to either respond to a prompt or answer a question or tell a story with just five visual symbols, right? So offering them a visual design language where circles equal wholeness, uh, rectangles or squares equal support, triangles equal goals, spirals equal change, and sort of like a star-shaped person equals relationships. Like with that as a basic visual key, if in terms of this artifact, if you can basically give people two pieces of information in addition to the artifact, if you can give them those symbols, what they mean, and what these people were drawing, right? Some description of these are stories based on journals, or these are stories, or this is the question that we asked them to respond to. With those two pieces of information, anybody can look at that visual and make an interpretation about what is being said in the visual language of these symbols. And of course, it sounds pretty basic and rudimentary. Artists have a tendency of hating it because they're like, just five symbols, I want so much more. But I mean, you can go nuts in terms. I've also seen people like embellish the shit out of these things with color and obviously size and scale, and the way that you can tell a vast amount of stories actually with just these five symbols. But something along those lines sort of jumps out, and the cool part that I think about, my favorite part about drawing together is always the interpretation phase, right? If we can start off, with, your drawing and my drawing, great, take 5-10 minutes to come up with that. But then our ability to then go, okay, James, this is what I drew. Like, tell me what it means. Tell me what meaning you make out of it. Knowing the question and the symbols, you can make an interpretation. And that interpretation for me is often very new information. There's a lot of truth, as we sort of like see the intention of the other person, but there's also interesting ways that your interpretation like skews off from my intention, but in ways that are actually quite insightful that make me go, oh, that's what I meant, but that's absolutely what I meant, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's a really interesting space again to get people to sort of interact and jam. Give me just a sec.
So,
Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, something along those lines could be a lot of fun, not only to produce that sort of that artifact, but also to give folks the opportunity to sort of share. Like if these journals were done individually, then two things sort of are very alive there. The ability to share with somebody my reflection and my sort of journey of discovery and to get their reflection on it is both very interesting and a little scary at the same time, right? Because if it's my journal, these are very, very personal things, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the nice thing about drawing together as well is it always gives you a little bit of like that noise of misinterpretation can also be a defensive strategy as well, where it's like, oh no, that's not what I meant. That maybe that's a little too personal. Maybe you know. So,
I get.
depending
Okay.
on your subgroup or your folks, that might be handy.
Yeah, this helps. This helps a lot. You have anything you want to? I need to leave in 5 minutes.
Yeah. No, I got to scoop up the kids as well. No, I think what I'm working on here in Amsterdam is we've been doing this Regions Unite thing, which is usually larger gatherings. So what I would like to get started up, and I don't know if it'll be manageable before the end of the year, but I'd like to have a more like high frequency gathering, like on a weekly, ideally a weekly basis, right? To say, hey, if you're concerned about the topics of regeneration, sustainability here in the city of Amsterdam, this is where we're at. There will be something live popping every single week. Just show up, like, and really give the community an opportunity to have a time and space to show up at. There's a lot of different sort of initiatives that I think are trying to really stimulate this in the area of Amsterdam. We've got the Donut Economics Action Lab. There's the Think School of Creative Leadership here in Amsterdam. There is the Climate Kick, the knowledge and innovation community that I know has an interest in this. There's the Regeneratie Coöperatie, the regenerative cooperative here, as well as the new entrants, not new entrants, Collectivo's got their office here in Amsterdam and is interested in sort of spinning up a ReFi DAO local node. So I think there's a lot of different players, but around the meme of regeneration, there still tends to be this like technologists over here, activists over there. So if we can just create a more high frequency nexus for collaboration and gathering, then that's my sort of ambition for the fourth quarter.
And when are you planning to like do the fast, or you've already started? Have you had the first meeting?
Well, that's the interesting question, right? There's sort of a couple different ways to go about it. Obviously, there's the fast mover, which is just throw something up on the calendar and see who the fuck shows up. And there's also the attempt to sort of build some form of consensus through these different groups that are already pre-existing and say, like, hey, do you maybe want to do a thing together? Both of these strategies have upsides and downsides. My bias is always towards, let's just throw something on the fucking calendar and see who the fuck shows up. Um, because I think that's much easier to bootstrap than getting all of the players to sort of line up and go, oh yeah, that thing that you're thinking of, Jeremy, that makes more sense than this fantasy that we have, or the weaving of those things together can take a long time. But it's funny, the I the who is it? It was guys from the Meta cartel. That's their jam, right? Go far, go together, right? So maybe it's time for me to learn some new skills, James, and not just keep doing shit randomly, and maybe try and build some consensus. It could be interesting.
Yeah, that kind of gathering to me provokes the thought. I think open space
Yeah.
looks to be something that can really get people, open up to share what's really on their mind and what they really care about. Um, and maybe also World Cafe, open space. But I really like the open space approach.
I think what I love about that is then that's obviously from an organizational perspective so much less work, right? People just
Yeah.
bring what they want. But that also slots into one of these. There's a framework, a relatively new agile framework called the fast agile scaling blah 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 that uses open space as its basis. It basically just adds a role that is someone who's interested in the content and wants to see a particular type of outcome, and sort of stacking that onto into an open space to enable people to sort of self-organize around that outcome. So that could also be an interesting way of sort of hybridizing this productive direction. Let's actually do some shit. Because I don't know about you, James. I'm fucking sick. I love. Let me slow down. I love talking about regeneration. It's also very nice, and I'm so fucking bored of it. It's killing me. Like, can we stop talking about shit and do the goddamn thing for Christ's sake?
Yeah. True, true. Like, yeah. Yeah, I need to jump off.
Yep. Righteous man. Good seeing you around. And we'll get this out on the web to help share the knowledge with some other folks. And I hope to see you next week, man.
Yeah, me too. Bye-bye.
All right. Safe travels, my dude. Well, here we are. This is the open of the autumnal season for the Wise Crowds design call. We're on here at Mondays at 4 p.m. Central European time. You can find a link somewhere on my link tree for sure. I'll put one in the thing on the things. What is worth noting? What's worth noting? I don't want to host this call anymore. Not that I don't want to show up, but I don't want to host it. And so, if you want to host this call, I will show up. I would love to have you host this call. I would love to distribute the responsibility for convening this space and engage with it as a participant, much more as a participant. Rich Bartlett from Micro Solidarity and the that shit, and Spiral as well. He mentioned something that I really love, and I think I need to lean more into, is that everybody leads some of the time. No one leads all the time. And I think for this call, the Wise Crowds design call, I would love for that to be the case. So if you would like to lead this call and to coordinate the peer-to-peer consultation and value that we create for and with one another, hit me up and let's fucking grow. Yeah.